Well, my name is Susan, and I am from the United States, and I got a degree in bilingual bicultural studies with a concentration in ESL. And I moved to Mexico after working in the States for a couple of years, and I've been here ever since. So it's been a while. I've been here, my goodness, almost 16 years.
Wow.
Yeah. And I really like it. I'm very happy here. I live very close to the beach and go as often as possible.
So, Susan, you did a broadcast meeting for Allo 7 tutors about Bloom's taxonomy, and I just want to tell you I was absolutely riveted, and I think about it a lot. And so I wanted to do this video with you so that we could capture your wonderful knowledge on the subject. I know that a lot of teachers hear Bloom's taxonomy and they may go, oh gosh, not again. But
Right.
this is a really cool, unique approach to how we can use it in the online classroom to be the most effective with our students. So I guess let's start at the very beginning. What
Okay.
is Bloom's taxonomy?
Well, basically, it's a classification system and it looks like a pyramid. Okay. And the great thing about Bloom's taxonomy is it can be inserted into so many different areas in education. It was created by a man named Benjamin Bloom in 1956. And basically, it was to help teachers meet their educational objectives. And it goes beyond just can someone do a math problem? Can someone write a sentence? It really taps into critical thinking. Even today, it's still very, very relevant. And it has been revised, and people have even made smaller, or I guess you could say bigger taxonomies as well that stem from that, but it is something that is just super practical. What I would like to talk about and that I think is so important is how can we as tutors show our superpowers? What is so special about us? We can go through the courseware, we can go through all of the exercises and the new words that are already there. But what is it that we can offer that is above and beyond what is just in the courseware? Yes, we're native English speakers. Yes, we are good at conversation. We love children. But what else can we do? What else can we help teach them? And so Bloom's taxonomy is a really great way to tap into more critical thinking. And it's also a really good way to engage them, to really have them think on a different level and come up with the language on their own and produce it on their own, because they can repeat, which is good. And that's actually on the taxonomy. That's the lowest part of the pyramid, that is remember. And so recalling is actually an important skill, especially when you're just beginning with the language and you need to practice pronunciation. But we can even go beyond that, even at very basic levels that some people might not be aware of. What we tend to do is we will ask a question about a new word, okay? And let's say it's Genius English 1.
Hmm.
Okay, and this is very basic. And the words are dog, cat, rabbit, and bird, for example.
Sure.
Well, what can we ask them about a dog? How can we actually get them? And we could have them repeat dog, which is important. I say, you say, and that's good. But what else can we do? I mean, well, we expand, and a lot of tutors already do this, and they might not realize what they're doing, or they might not be aware. So, what I would like to do is to make people aware of the superpowers they already have and the great things they're already doing, but do it in a more conscious level so they have an actual objective and a goal with it. Instead of saying I'm going to ask them a bunch of questions to get them talking, I actually have an objective in mind. I actually want to move them up the pyramid, the taxonomy, so that they are able to really, really produce in a different level in English.
Talk me through that taxonomy. What do those questions look like? What are the different steps?
Well, the taxonomy is really about developing students' cognition in the language. Remember that adults Well, in theory, our cognitive skills are fully developed, and for the most part, they are in many areas, right?
Yes.
But with children's this is still a skill that they need to learn. They might need to learn how to remember, to recall, to analyze, to evaluate, to create. Okay, we think of children as naturally creative, and in a way they are because they use their imaginations, but we can actually push them even more. Okay, so I think that it is important to know how to expand the material in the courseware so students can communicate more effectively and develop higher order thinking skills. Okay, in other words, develop those thinking skills that develop their levels of cognition. And that's really, I think, the objective for us. They're developing a lot of their listening comprehension and their reception, but getting them to produce is a very different skill.
Yeah.
Um, I understand a lot more English than I can produce. Of course I do. Of course. And it's my native language, but of course I can read books in Old English. And I understand it. Maybe not everything. It's something I need to look up, but I understand. But there's no way I can produce that.
I never thought about it that way. I do read on a higher level than in which I speak.
Of course.
And you're just blowing my mind right now. Please continue.
So, what are the ways that we already expand? I mean, we ask questions, right? And what if we get the students to ask questions? That would be pretty great, to get them to start to produce the questions and they can ask each other the questions. We use the whiteboard in Zoom and we have them draw. I mean, that is a way to produce something. And from that drawing, we can get them to produce either just simple words, simple phrases, or even more. We use the photo bank. I use the photo bank. I love photos because I can just ask so many questions about that. A lot of people sing songs. I know you like that.
I love
You're
to
very
sing
good at that.
songs.
Right. It engages them. And it is really a great way to improve. TPR really, really helps. Well, the great thing about TPR is you're actually assessing whether or not it's a language issue or a cognition issue. And we're going to get to that in a minute because that's a perfect way to differentiate between that, because a lot of times people will ask a question and they think, oh, they haven't reached that cognitive level yet. Well, that's not true. It's because they don't understand one of the words. So if you use TPR to clarify what that word means, they understand it and you realize, yes, they have reached that level of cognition.
Yeah.
So it's very important to determine, is it a language barrier or is it something that is a little bit above and beyond? It's also important to consider their age. Before they reach the age of 11 or 12, children do not think in the same abstract way that an adolescent or an adult will think. They are still very concrete. For example, you can have two glasses and you can have a tall, narrow one and you can have a short, fat one.
Hmm.
Okay. And you can have, well, we would recognize it probably as equal amounts of water. Okay. But to a 5-year-old or to a 7 or even 8-year-old, they may not realize. They might think, well, there's more in the tall glass
Hmm.
because it's taller. And you're like, well, no, actually, it's thinner. It's taller and thin. So it's the same that's in the short, big glass.
Hmm.
And so that kind of thinking starts to develop a little bit more as they get
Interesting.
older. Yeah, they're still very concrete in a lot of the ways. And it's very cute with the little ones. You'll say something and they'll. Another thing to remember is their stages and second language acquisition. Most of our students are in the early production and speech emergence phase. So basically, this means that in early production, it means they have a limited comprehension. They produce 1 or 2 word responses. They participate using key words and familiar phrases, and they use a lot of present tense verbs. Speech emergence, basically, they say they have a better comprehension. Again, you comprehend more than you can produce. They can only produce simple sentences. They do make some grammar and pronunciation errors, and of course, the jokes come later. You're not going to understand jokes. I'm still learning jokes in Spanish, so it takes time with that. there are, with that said, yes, there are students that have a very high level of English. I have one who's intermediate fluency, just one. Excellent comprehension and just makes a few grammatical errors. And advanced fluency, the student has near native level of speech. I don't know how many students we have that really fit into that category. That's why I say I believe that most of them are in the early production and speech emergence stages, some maybe in intermediate fluency. Keeping this in mind is super, super important because they cannot perform in a subject in science and math and history if they do not have the code that they need. And in this case, that's the language.
Mm-hmm.
So if we're going to ask them to think and produce on a deeper level, they need that language. So with Bloom's taxonomy, you can use the different levels of that pyramid to tap into that. That basically they can produce based on their language level, and you start with the lower levels of cognition. It doesn't mean that they can't produce at a higher level of cognition, but they just lack the language, but they will get there.
Hmm.
If you look at a simple picture of a dog and you look at the pyramid, okay, I had created some questions that go up the pyramid about a dog. And this is Genius English 1. And I was able to use the entire pyramid for Genius English 1. Okay. So, for example, a simple question like, what do you see? The words on the pyramid are the levels of cognition. And right next to the question, what do you see, in parentheses, is the word recall. That's the skill. Okay, there are different skills for each level. Another question is, I say, it's not really a question, it's I say dog, you say dog, and that's repeat. And that's okay because studies have shown over years and years and years, when you repeat, like in a song
Mm-hmm.
or in a poem, that you do remember it. Okay, the next one, understand, how many ears does the dog have?
2 ears.
Okay, now I'm going to do this. How many ears does the dog have?
Oh.
How many ears?
Dog has 2 ears.
Okay, so let's say you ask the question with no TPR.
Yeah.
And they might, like you did, well, 2. But some of them might look at you. And, but it doesn't mean they can't answer that question. It means we need to help them with the language.
Because they may be understanding what they want to say in their native language in their head, but they can't produce what they're saying, what they want to say in English.
Sure. Or maybe they don't understand how many. Or maybe they don't understand ears. Okay. Or maybe they can, sometimes what happens is they actually do understand the words individually, but they can't seem to understand them when they're put together. It can be a little confusing. The structure can throw them off.
Interesting.
So that TPR is very, very helpful and very valuable. For example, what color is the dog? I don't really have different colors here to show you. I have a shark that's blue, but maybe that's not the best example, but you understand. If
Sure.
you say, what color is the dog? The skills that we're developing is describe, and it falls under the level of understanding. Okay. And then we can move up. If the students are doing okay and they understand it, we can start to move up the pyramid. If we notice that the students are having some difficulty, that's when we need to scaffold. Scaffolding is when the teacher models for the students and even helps them by inserting a word now and then and just guiding them. Maybe they're just struggling with that one word, and you say that word for them, and then they can continue.
Mm-hmm.
Students will often do that for each other as well. So I think that that's kind of nice when they do it for each other. Another thing to consider as we move up the pyramid is their emotional state. Sometimes they feel a lot of pressure. If you just bombard them with question after question after question because you think, wow, they're doing a great job. I'm so impressed. I want to challenge them more. Oh my gosh, they understood that. I'm going to challenge them more. Watch the student very carefully. Watch them. If they start to kind of feel like you're picking on them, even though that's not your intention, that invisible wall goes up and they start to feel flooded. and they start to stumble over themselves and get nervous. Sometimes it's a good idea, depending. You have to gauge it, watch the student, ask a couple of questions and move on, and ask another student and then move on. And a lot of positive reinforcement is very important. Remember, too, in psychology, that when we set the expectations at a certain level for anybody, whether that's a child or an adult, that's exactly where that person will reach. Okay? When
Hmm.
we push them and we set that the expectations higher, guess what?
They
They're going
reach
to.
them.
They do. They do. So if we sometimes as teachers, we don't realize it, and it's certainly not our intention, but we do kind of say, well, for this level, for Genius English 1, they know colors, they know how many, they know it's a dog, we're good to go. Next page. Well, they can do more. And if the time permits, of course, because we do need to get through the courseware, why not push them a little bit more? So it's all a balance, and it takes practice and it takes time to get to know the students as well. It's not something that you want to do a whole lot of your first few classes. Get to know them, let them be comfortable with you, and then keep going. I had a student that, uh, well, we were talking about nationalities and countries and what languages people speak. And I asked her, how many languages do you speak? And she said, well, one. I speak Chinese. I said, well, no, you speak two. You speak English. And she said, no, I don't. I said, well, what are we speaking now? If you were speaking to me in Chinese, I wouldn't be able to understand a word you're saying. Of course you do. And so she said, oh, well, not very well. I said, well, you're learning, but you're going to improve and you're going to get better. You got this. You can do this. And so I'm pushing her a little bit. And part of pushing them is to build their confidence too. And this is not meant to demoralize them. It's actually meant to build their confidence.
I
Okay.
think people get surprised when they reach a new level of achievement that they didn't
Mm-hmm.
think that they had inside them before. I
Yes.
love helping my students come to a aha moment. Those are
Yes.
very
Doesn't that
cool.
feel good?
Absolutely.
It makes us kind of assess it more, which is good. Which actually, assess, speaking of assess, is one of the skills up the pyramid under evaluate.
Great.
Okay. Keep in mind with younger students, they might be able to do the first 3 levels very well, and then it gets a little more challenging for them. But the questions that you can see next to the pyramid are for Genius English 1 at a very basic level. And some of the students will be able to do all of it, and some of them won't. It is important too that when you have them create something, have them use their imagination a little bit, not just simply reproducing. Because really, if you say, I want you to draw a bird, basically that goes back down the pyramid and they're just recalling. When we ask them to create, it's something a little bit more than just recalling something and just reproducing that. What you can do with Bloom's taxonomy, you can also see the pyramid, but then you can also see the skills written next to each level, and you can refer to it. And sometimes it requires a little bit of prep work. And this is something that might feel a little daunting to do it the first time. And you think, well, I don't know if I really have time to spend 30 minutes on, I'm teaching 6 classes tomorrow. How am I going to prepare and do all of this? Just start very light. Start with, just focus on the new words, or focus on some of the, like, pick 2 pictures from the story and just create a couple of questions just quickly and some activities for them to do. And as you do this, number one, you'll find you'll get really a lot faster at it. Okay. And number two, you're going to be able to improvise. And it just takes some practice, but it does require a little bit of effort on the part of the tutor in the beginning to actually do a little prep work. Now, if you are teaching different courseware, let's say you're teaching, I think it is Genius English 9 through 12,
Okay.
I believe, where it's basically just discussion questions. It's like a
Yeah.
conversation class.
Genius English 9 through 12.
Okay. Well, honestly, this is where Bloom's taxonomy just comes in really, really great. Let's say you have some students that maybe you might think are a little bit advanced. And you think, what am I going to do? I'm going to go through this courseware and I'll be finished with it in 10 minutes. And I've got, the rest of the class to cover. I have a 25-minute class. What am I going to do? I have 15 minutes. Time for us to get busy as tutors, right?
Mm-hmm.
And start applying this. Try it. And it's not just asking questions. It's also doing some activities. The point is to get them to talk, right? And that's where and I go back to the very beginning of our talk, that's where we show our superpowers as tutors. That's how we show how valuable we are, because we are valuable. And that's what we can do that is special.
One of my favorite classes that I've ever taught was actually a Genius English 9. And the student that I taught, just wonderful. And I spoke with her, I want to say 2 to 3 times a week for probably about 6 weeks. She and I grew very close over those 6 weeks. And we spoke a lot about our common interests, which included music a lot of the time. And so we were able to really connect on that space. And I used that to help make the other parts of the courseware relatable to her.
We are creating relationships, and we do want to develop a good rapport with our students. And it's kind of why we do it, I think, right?
It's absolutely why we do it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think Bloom's taxonomy, though, in this space, it really does create a great conversation ladder almost for your students, because for me, I know that I've been in that class where I've maybe skipped a rung or two and ended up in a space where I'm just completely asking a question that's over the student's head. And one, I feel bad because they're looking at me going, what? What are you saying? And the other place is I don't want them to feel less confident in not being able to answer that question. And so when you spoke about this in our broadcast meeting, it really impressed upon me the progression of the steps and how vital those are from one space to the next. So could you go ahead and step us through the whole taxonomy and just give us those sample questions that we love so much?
The sample questions that I did in the broadcast meeting were with the picture of the dog in Genius English 1. And we did already go through some of them. We went through remember, which is I say dog, you say dog. And the skill is repeat. Another one is what do you see? And the skill is recall. So repeat and recall are 2 examples of skills that you can develop, cognitive skills, under the level called remember. Okay, the next level up is to understand, because once you remember something and you say, oh yes, I know that's a dog, then you can start to really understand what a dog is in that language. It doesn't mean that they don't know what it is. Okay, so that's when you start asking questions about the dog, not just asking them to remember what a dog is, but what is it about the dog that you can tell me? For example, what color is the dog and how many ears does the dog have? And again, you're developing the skill to describe. So once you're able to identify the dog and be able to understand the qualities of a dog, you can apply that even further, and you can apply it. For example, let's use the skill demonstrate. Okay, and you say, well, what sound does a dog make? And the kids love that one. They start barking like a dog. Occasionally, animal sounds are pretty great. I have clucked like a chicken to get students' attention, I confess, and it works. It's like a charm. After you're able to apply your knowledge, then you can move up to analyze. Okay, so keeping this for, let's say it's a very young student, maybe 6 or 7 years old. Okay, is what is bigger, and they'll get it. They'll get the main idea. They will do it.
Well, that comparison and the props come into play in that space to kind of facilitate understanding in that way.
And that's what we want to do, because don't just write it off as not being able to understand, to reach that level of cognition. It could be something in language.
I mean, so you're almost saying, to take a different type of approach, to if a question that you're asking doesn't hit the mark, maybe it's something internal that you can change, to say, okay, well, how many ears does the lion have? How many ears? One.
One.
And moving on from that point, to incorporate different types of, your TPR, your props, and taxonomy. Gosh, that's almost like a trifecta.
Then after analyzing it, you can go into evaluating it. Okay, now this is one that usually results in the deer in headlights look. If you say, do you like dogs? And that's a super common question. They're used to that. Yes, no. But let's ask the question, why? Now, why can really trip them up. Maybe they understand it, but man, that's hard to answer. That's really hard to explain because they know why, but they just, and so we need to be careful with the why. Um, Sometimes they just know that, like, for example, I have a little girl, she's 5 years old, and she knows that she likes red better than any other color, but she can't really tell me why. Let's say that they can evaluate and they're able to say that they like dogs or they don't like dogs, and maybe, just maybe, they can even say why with some scaffolding, some help with the teacher, okay, from the teacher. Then they can move up to create. Now, sometimes, let's say you're moving up this pyramid and you skip, you go from apply to create. That's okay. That's okay. It's not always the greatest idea because you might be going above them and you need to really gauge it. But sometimes it's okay. Because if you're asking them to draw a dog and you're saying, I want you to create a new kind of dog or something like that, even if they don't really have the language skills, man, they might really enjoy that. They might really get something out of it. So it's not that you have to be so strict and just first, second, but they're not necessarily, although that is the idea to move up it like that. But sometimes we can,
You have to
well, you
gauge
can,
it by the student and their own individual commitment to the
mhm.
class. You know, if and sometimes too, if you go beyond and then take a step back, it's almost like that step back is a little bit easier. Uh,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and sometimes I've had students where I won't start at the bottom. I just know that I'm not going to do that. I'm going to start in the middle because I just know that they know it. So I start in the middle of the pyramid, and yeah, they got it. So I can move up.
yeah.
Or maybe I'm a little too high, but just go down one. So sometimes I've started at the top and then moved down. I mean, just it just depends. It's
Mhm.
not it's not an exact formula. But
So Bloom's taxonomy, as it applies to Allo 7 tutoring, in a couple sentences. What are your thoughts?
basically, it is a tool that we can use to expand on the courseware. When we expand, which a lot of us are already doing, it is good to have some objectives in mind. If we can prepare a few questions and we can start simple, take the new words and prepare some questions, maybe for some of the words. Go to the story, prepare some questions. When you feel more comfortable with that, you can move to the grammar structure and prepare some questions. And you're getting them to produce the language, okay? You're getting them to improve their cognition in a different code, not just in Chinese, but in English. And I think that it's just something that we can do that is beyond the courseware. Okay, instead of just next page, the next page, how can we enrich it? How can we get them talking?
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Susan, for coming and talking to us about Bloom's taxonomy. This has
Sure.
been it's been a great conversation for me. I've certainly learned a lot. I know that folks watching this video will also learn a lot about this, and I hope that they have fun applying it in their classes. And, I'm sure that if they have any questions, feel free to leave those in the comments below, and we'll get to them as we are able. Thank you so much again for coming, Susan. Your wealth of knowledge as always, and it's always a pleasure.
Sure. Sure. It was a pleasure.